There was no blast inside the Kremlin's walls last night, and no bunker caved in under Red Square. But something structural did give way, and it happened about 800 kilometers east of Moscow, at a Rosneft refinery in Saratov that is now burning for reasons the people who run Russia would very much prefer you not think too hard about. That's the real story behind the headline you clicked, and it's bigger than a collapsed bunker, because a bunker is a building, and what actually broke overnight into the 8th of July 2026 is the thing that keeps the war funded. Ukraine ran one of the largest single-night strike operations of the entire war. Saratov, Tatarstan, Bashkortostan, a military airbase in Voronezh, tankers out in the Azov, and when you add it to the strike 2 nights earlier, the picture stops looking like a series of incidents and starts looking like a plan reaching its conclusion. I'm Professor Alex, and if you want to understand these moments while they're still forming, instead of after they're explained to you, take a second to subscribe, because this one moves fast. Let me show you what's actually cracking, and why the people who should be worried about it are the ones with the most to lose. Start with what the pictures showed, because the pictures don't lie even when the officials do. Around 3 in the morning local time, monitoring channels lit up with reports of drones over Saratov, one of Russia's oldest and largest refineries, a Rosneft facility that feeds fuel to the military and to Engels Air Base, the home of the strategic bombers that have spent years launching missiles at Ukrainian cities. The governor confirmed 1 person killed, several wounded, and called the target civilian industrial sites, which is the phrase you reach for when you don't want to say the word refinery out loud. Fires were still visible at dawn, and Saratov was only one node. In Tatarstan, more than 1,400 kilometers from the front, drones hit the TANECO complex, one of the most technically advanced refineries Russia has, the kind with hydrocracking and delayed coking units that you cannot simply rebuild in a month, along with the TAIF-NK Refinery and the Nizhnekamsk Neftekhim petrochemical plant, one of the largest of its kind in all of Europe. Then Bashkortostan, a pumping station roughly 900 miles from Ukrainian-held ground. Russia's defense ministry said it shot down 415 drones that night. Sit with that number for a moment. Even if you take Moscow's own count at face value, you're describing an air campaign of a scale that doesn't happen by accident, and the ones that got through were enough to set 6 strategic sites on fire across a country 11 time zones wide. Now here's the part the collapse bunker headline skips, because it's less cinematic and far more consequential. 2 nights before Saratov, on the 6th of July, Ukraine reached Omsk, western Siberia, between 2,500 and 3,000 kilometers from Ukrainian territory. That's the deepest long-range strike of the war, and Omsk isn't a symbolic target, it's Russia's single largest refinery, a facility that processes north of 20 million tons of crude a year, and Ukrainian special forces said they damaged the primary crude unit and forced the plant to halt. Within hours, there was panic buying at gas stations across the region. So put the sequence together. Omsk on the 6th, Saratov, Tatarstan, Bashkortostan on the 8th. And according to the analysts tracking this, Ukraine has now struck all 11 of Russia's largest gasoline producers. Not most of them, all of them. That's not a raid. That's a system being dismantled, one load-bearing column at a time. And the man in the Kremlin knows exactly what it means, even if he'll never say it into a microphone. Here's what it means in numbers, and this is where a war 6,000 miles away starts reaching into your life whether you follow it or not. Analysts now estimate that roughly a quarter of Russia's refining capacity is offline. A quarter. Gasoline output is running about 20% below what the country needs just to keep itself moving. And the result of that gap isn't abstract, it's rationing, real rationing, now spread across most of Russia's 83 regions, with an outright ban on fuel sales in occupied Crimea. Think about the timing. This is July, summer travel season, agricultural season, the exact window when a country burns the most fuel it will burn all year. And that's when the tank runs dry. When a petrostate, a country that sells energy to the world, cannot reliably put gasoline in its own citizens' cars during harvest, you are watching something that money alone can't paper over. Because the problem isn't the price of fuel anymore, it's the physical absence of it. And still, I want to be honest with you, because the honest version is more useful than the flattering one. Nobody stormed the Kremlin last night. No bunker collapsed. The oligarchs did not walk out on Vladimir Putin. If anything, the visible signals point the other direction, and you have to reckon with that if you want to understand where this is really heading. Just weeks ago, at its Moscow Congress, the ruling United Russia Party rolled out a campaign poster branding itself the Party of the President, and declaring that being for Putin is the bare minimum, embedding the war's Z symbol right into the slogan. That's the first time since 2007 the party has explicitly tied itself to him by name. For years he kept a careful distance, let Medvedev chair it, floated above the machinery. Not anymore. And the slate they've put forward for September's Duma elections is a wall of hardliners. Lavrov at the top, war hawks and propagandists elevated as the model of what a loyal Russian should be. That is not the behavior of a regime that thinks it's about to fall. That's a regime bolting itself to its leader and daring the pressure to do its worst. So which is it? Is Russia cracking or is it consolidating? And the uncomfortable answer, the one that actually explains the anxiety you can feel radiating out of Moscow right now, is that it's doing both at once, and that combination is more dangerous than either one alone. Because underneath the loyalty posters, the ground is moving. Putin's own pollster, the Kremlin-friendly FOM, put trust in him at 69% in late June. That's the lowest reading since the full-scale invasion began in 2022. Gallup found confidence in the Russian military down to 66% from 80 in 2022, confidence in the government down to 53 from 66. And here's the one that should worry the people planning that September election most. Russians are more pessimistic about their own economy than at any point in 20 years. 60% say things where they live are getting worse. And that survey was taken before this month's fuel shortages really bit. So when you see a ruling party plastering the leader's name on every wall, don't read confidence into it. Read necessity. You brand harder when the foundation feels softer. You can hear the strain in the voices that are supposed to be the regime's loudest cheerleaders. When Ukraine hit Moscow's own refinery earlier in this campaign, it wasn't the opposition that snapped. It was the hardliners, the nationalists who want more war, not less. One of them, a businessman who funds a nationalist media outlet, wrote publicly, "What else has to happen before we start fighting for real?" That's not a man plotting a coup. That's something arguably more corrosive to a wartime leader. It's a true believer, losing faith that the man in charge can deliver the victory he keeps promising. Putin himself has started to bend, just slightly, in how he talks. He called this period difficult. He accused Ukraine of terrorism against energy infrastructure while promising Russians the Kremlin is responding to all problems. The Institute for the Study of War noticed he very carefully avoided saying the words gasoline shortage out loud, even as he tried to project competence. When a leader starts choosing which reality to name and which to leave unspoken, that's the tell. Not a collapse, a crack. And cracks are what you watch because they tell you where the break will come long before it arrives. Now let me pull you back to why any of this lands on your side of the ocean. Because this is a finance channel and I'm not going to pretend a Russian refinery fire stays in Russia. It doesn't. It moves through the one market that connects all of it, the price of oil. And right now that market is being hit from two directions at the same time, and you are downstream of both. On one side, Ukraine is methodically taking Russian refining and export infrastructure offline, tightening the supply of refined product and rattling the logistics of Russian crude. On the other side, and this is the piece a lot of people covering the Russia story are missing, the United States and Iran just tore their ceasefire back open. Overnight into the 9th of July, U.S. forces struck roughly 90 targets across Iran, the second straight day of strikes, and President Trump declared that as far as he's concerned, the ceasefire is over, threatening a new blockade and warning he could go after Iran's main export terminal on Karg Island. Tehran said it hit back at U.S. bases in the region. The waterway at the center of it all, the Strait of Hormuz, had its threat level raised to severe. Watch what that did to the tape, because the market told you exactly how it feels. Brent crude, which had drifted back down toward pre-war levels during the fragile truce, snapped upward more than 5% in a single session, its biggest daily gain since May, pushing back to around $77, $78 a barrel. West Texas Intermediate, the U.S. benchmark, climbed past 73, brushing 75. And this is the whipsaw that should get your attention. Just days earlier, traders were positioned for a glut. OPEC Plus was raising quotas. Middle Eastern producers were ramping output. Inventories were finally building. U.S. crude stockpiles rose for the first time since mid-April. The entire market was leaning one way. And then two energy shocks arrived in the same 72 hours and shoved it violently the other. That is the kind of setup that turns an ordinary week into a repricing, because the market wasn't braced for it, and unbraced markets move hard. Here's the through line, the thing tying a drone over Saratov to the number on a gas station sign in Ohio. Both of these crises are supply-side energy shocks, and supply-side shocks are the ones that reach your wallet whether the broader economy is strong or weak, because they don't care how you're doing. They just make the fuel that runs everything more expensive. Ukraine is degrading Russian refining, which tightens global product markets and pressures Russian export flows. The US and Iran are threatening the passage through which a fifth of the world's oil physically travels. And when crude reprices upward, it doesn't stay in the futures pit. It shows up at your pump within a couple of weeks. It lifts the cost of diesel that moves every good you buy. It feeds directly into the inflation number the Federal Reserve is staring at while it tries to decide when it can finally cut rates. So if you've been waiting on cheaper money, a lower mortgage, relief on a car loan, understand that the path there now runs straight through a Russian refinery and a strait most Americans couldn't find on a map. That's not a slogan. That's the plumbing. And there's a second order piece here that's easy to miss and worth a beat, because it shows how one act ripples outward. During the same wave of strikes, drones hit a Gazprom pumping station that feeds the Blue Stream pipeline carrying Russian gas to Turkey. Gazprom said exports weren't affected this time, the damage wasn't severe enough. But hold on to why it matters anyway. Blue Stream and Turkstream are the last remaining pipeline routes for Russian gas into Turkey and onward toward European markets, and they cover something like 40% of Turkey's gas imports. Every time a pumping station along that route takes a hit, even a glancing one, it plants a tail risk under European energy security, heading toward another winter. A Russian State Duma member called it energy terrorism aimed at Russia's partners. The point isn't that the lights went out in Ankara last night. They didn't. The point is that Ukraine has demonstrated it can reach the artery, and a market that knows an artery is reachable prices that knowledge in, quietly, before anything actually breaks. So let's go back to that word from the headline, the bunker, and let's use it honestly, because I think the metaphor is right, even though the literal claim is wrong. There is a bunker cracking. It's just not made of concrete. It's the economic bunker Russia built to survive this war, the fortress of oil revenue and refining capacity and export routes that was supposed to let the Kremlin outlast Ukraine and outlast the West's patience. That structure is the one taking the hits. A quarter of the refining capacity dark, fuel rationed across a petrostate at the height of summer, public trust at 4-year lows, nationalists asking out loud when the real fighting starts. That's the bunker. And it isn't collapsing in a single night with a dramatic bang, which is exactly why the honest version matters more than the viral one, because a slow structural failure is harder to see, harder to reverse, and far harder for a leader to explain away than a single explosion he could blame on the enemy and move past. But I owe you the other side, the reason not to get ahead of the story, because getting ahead of it is how people lose money and lose the plot. Russia is not out of oil. Its crude exports are still moving, its shadow fleet is still sailing, and a refinery fire, even a bad one, can often be brought back over weeks or months. The country has absorbed a great deal of pain over 3.5 years, and its capacity to absorb more should never be underestimated. Putin, for his part, said just this week that Russia is ready to renew talks on ending the war, which sounds like an opening until you read the fine print, because he wants those talks on the basis of the 2022 Istanbul framework, which includes the demand that Ukraine hand over the Donbass. That's not a peace offer. That's a surrender demand wearing the costume of diplomacy. And even as he said it, Russia was firing ballistic missiles at Kyiv for the 3rd time in 6 days. So anyone selling you the idea that last night was the end of the war is selling you a feeling, not a fact. The war didn't end last night. It entered a phase where both sides are trying to break the other's ability to keep going, and Ukraine just proved it can reach further into that machinery than most people believed possible. Which brings me to the question I keep circling back to, the one I genuinely don't have a clean answer for, and I'd rather admit that than fake certainty. What actually happens to a regime that grows more repressive and more loyal on the surface at the exact moment its economic foundation grows more fragile underneath? Because those two trends don't cancel out, they compound. A leader who feels the ground softening tends to grip harder, not looser. And the harder he grips, the fewer honest voices reach him. And the fewer honest voices reach him, the worse his decisions get. That's the dangerous geometry Russia is sliding into right now, and it's the reason the loyalty posters should reassure you less, not more. History is not short of examples of governments that looked most unshakable in the season right before they shook. And it's also full of regimes that everyone wrote off far too early, and that ground on for years out of sheer inertia and fear. I'm not going to tell you which one this is, because I don't know, and neither does anyone claiming otherwise on your feed tonight. What I can tell you is what to actually watch, so you're reading the signal instead of the noise. Watch the fuel. Watch whether that quarter of offline refining capacity gets restored in weeks or drags on for months, because the longer it stays dark, the deeper the rationing cuts, and the harder the political pressure squeezes. Watch the pollsters, even the Kremlin's own, because when a friendly pollster prints an inconvenient number, someone upstairs decided that number needed to exist. Watch Hormuz, because the second that strait's disruption becomes real rather than threatened, oil doesn't climb 5%, it gaps. And that gap arrives at your pump and in your grocery bill faster than any headline can prepare you for. And watch the nationalists, not the liberals, because in a system like this one, the threat to the man at the top has never come from the people who want less war. It comes from the ones who wanted more and stopped believing he could give it to them. So here's where I'll leave you tonight, on the 9th of July, 2026, with refineries still smoldering across half of Russia and crude still twitching on every fresh headline out of the Gulf. The bunker didn't collapse, but if you were sitting inside the real one, the economic one, listening to the reports come in from Saratov and Omsk and Tatarstan, watching a quarter of your refining capacity go dark in a single week while your own people can't fill their tanks and your own pollsters can't hide the numbers, would you feel the walls holding? Or would you feel them starting, very quietly, to give? This is Professor Alex. I'll see you in the next one.